Yahshua.
Time's up.
Through all the research, through everything that you have discovered, and through looking at your models, you've been able to chart and plot the fact that this planetary body, this illuminated body, this mysterious planet X correlates and relates biblically. So then my question is to you, how far back does it take us? Can you give us a timeline of events of how far back it goes and how it actually sort of lines up with biblical accounts?
It is the most talked about object in the Bible and the least known until now. Using the imperial scientific method and correlating the data with the model, it proves out that there was 14 events in the Bible that coincide with 10 separate events. And they begin with Noah's flood, Tower of Babel, Lot and his wife, Joseph of Egypt, the Exodus, Joshua's long day, Job's trouble, the drought of Ruth, King David and King Saul. Saul had 3.5 year drought at the end of his reign. David had 3.5 year drought at the beginning of his reign. Total of 7. That's where I think we got the Star of David. That's where it started. Jonah's 40-day warning. Hezekiah when the shadow went backwards. The shadow went backwards on steps, not a sundial. And 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. The time period of Haggai. Haggai, the entire world shook according to them, and God said to him that he would shake it so hard that men would be thrown out of their chariots.
We have the model because of the Asian astronomer, the Chinese, the Korean, and the Japanese astronomers, of a segment of this orbit that gives us an elliptical path. This same object, when we overlay it into the 14 biblical accounts, these eyewitness accounts, we can build a model that follows the exact storyline. How Earth has slowed down. How the shadow went backwards. How do you get a 3-hour eclipse during Yeshua's sacrifice? How do you get 3 days of darkness during the Exodus? And so on and so on.
14.
We have a model for
14 biblical accounts. You have a model that matches how each thing could happen, and scientifically it is proven it could have happened. There has to be an object. God is using some type of an object, some type of a planet or something dark, something that can swing by and can create and can affect the earth in a way to create these 14 different biblical accounts.
Notice also in prophecy, the Lord explicitly states he is bringing the day of the Lord as a destruction from the Almighty. Now you look, and I think this is where people have to wrap their head around this. It talks about stars, the constellations, the sun, the moon, the earth. It seems like it's referring to moving the earth out of its present orbit. It's almost without a shadow of a doubt that the prophecy is describing the coming of Planet X and other heavenly bodies into the solar system, doesn't it?
Without a doubt, it's called the fiery dragon of old. Okay, and it is probably, when you're talking about an inanimate object, it's the most talked about object in the Bible, the most talked about object, and we're just coming to this conclusion that is there and that it's real, because you can go look through the Bible and find 7-year droughts multiple times.
seems that the Bible, geology, and archaeology are all telling the same story. But skeptics, who would like to regard the Exodus as myth, might resist the idea that it actually happened. Because this would imply that God does indeed exist. Believers, on the other hand, may feel that a scientific explanation of the biblical story takes God out of the equation.
But in the book of Exodus, God does not suspend nature. He manipulates it. In other words, according to the Bible, we should be able to understand the science behind the miracles. And the greatest miracle of them all was the parting of the sea.
My talk is going to be based on the Venus section of Worlds in Collision. It's not really the words of Dr. Velikovsky, but the survivors that he quotes, and the description of the events that took place. The dates are not important. I'm comfortable with his dates, but it doesn't really matter. It could be Nibiru, it could be Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, but I'm comfortable with Venus as he thought.
Venus? No way, Jose. Actually, history tells us that many of the ancients believed it to be the planet Mars. However, we know definitively today that it is the Planet X system which caused these past catastrophes.
Get a different image there. The picture that's painted is dust, sand, gravel, rocks, very large boulders falling from the sky, mingled with a river of fire. Dr. Velikovsky thought that was oil. In many cases it might be, but it might also be plasma, similar to the aurora. The dust, sand, rocks, and gravel and boulders were mingled with the river of fire. According to the Mesoamericans, the rocks were glowing red hot. If you can heat a rock to incandescence, it would be much easier to heat dust. So you have molten material. The electromagnetism might pull in iron preferentially. It's raining oil for days and nights. The oil's running through rivers. People climb trees to escape it and drowned. According to the Mexicans, I think it killed more people than the rocks and everything else combined. There's a hurricane going on, beyond our description, worse than Andrew, which almost killed me. It might have, actually. The sun rises where it used to set. That's a tough one. And it could be a tippy top, but from what I see in the field, it really looks like it stopped rotating and went the other way. You can go to the headwaters of the Colorado River. Rocky Mountain National Park, Fraser, Colorado. I've spent quite a bit of time there. You can see the valleys are full of sediment to a large height, flat on both sides, equal height, as if water was pushed up from the equator. There's a 13.25 mile bulge of water at the equator because of centrifugal force. If the Earth ceases to rotate, according to Dr. Velikovsky, the water would rush north and south. The dust that's falling would be part of the flood. That is what I believe is the sediments up at the top of the Colorado drainage.
Now what he's doing here is giving this is one page of one book. One page of one book. He's giving a very compact, highly condensed observation of what happens in a pole shift. Observations based on what he found going around the planet and finding the evidence. It's titled A Working Hypothesis. Let us assume as a working hypothesis that under the impact of a force or the influence of an agent, and the Earth does not travel in an empty universe, the axis of the Earth shifted or tilted. At that moment, an earthquake would make the globe shudder. Air and water would continue to move through inertia. Hurricanes would sweep the Earth, and seas would rush over continents, carrying gravel and sand and marine animals, casting them on the land. Heat would be developed. Rocks would melt, volcanoes would erupt, lava would flow from fissures in the ruptured ground and covered vast areas. Mountains would spring up from the plains and would travel and climb on the shoulders of other mountains, causing faults and rifts. Lakes would be tilted and emptied. Rivers would change their beds. Large land areas with all their inhabitants would slip under the sea. Forests would burn. Hurricanes and wild seas would wrest them from the ground on which they grew and pile them, branch and root, in huge heaps. The seas would turn into deserts, their waters rolling away. And if a change in the velocity of the Earth's rotation, slowing it down, should accompany the shifting of the axis, the water confined to the equatorial oceans by centrifugal force would retreat to the poles, and high tides and hurricanes would rush from pole to pole, carrying reindeer and seals to the tropics and desert lines into the Arctic, moving from the equator up and down the mountain ridges of the Himalayas and down the African jungles, and crumbled rocks torn from splintering mountains would be scattered over large distances, and herds of animals would be washed from the plains of Siberia. The shifting of the axis would also change the climate of every place, leaving corals in Newfoundland and elephants in Alaska, fig trees in northern Greenland, and luxuriant forests in Antarctica. In the event of a rapid shift of the axis, many species and genera of animals on land and in the sea would be destroyed, and civilizations, if any, would be reduced to ruins.
Now, do we have any evidence of this? In the past, yes. Remember the mammoths in Siberia?
Mm-hmm.
Where the mammoths had subtropical vegetation in their stomach and their mouth. They were still foraging. They were still eating vegetation. They didn't have time to swallow it. They were frozen before they could swallow it.
Scream in terror, for the day of the Lord has arrived. The time for the Almighty to destroy. Every arm is paralyzed with fear. Every heart melts, and people are terrified. Pangs of anguish grip them like those of a woman in labor. They look helplessly at one another, their faces aflame with fear. For see, the day of the Lord is coming, the terrible day of his fury and fierce anger. The land will be made desolate, and all the sinners destroyed with it.
I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder,
Come and see! Then everyone, the kings of the earth, the rulers, the generals, the wealthy, the powerful, and every slave and free person, all hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they cried to the mountains and the rocks,
Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come. Who can withstand it? Everything they built will fall, and from the ashes of their world, we'll build a better one. God damn America! God damn America! God damn
I saw the end of the world. I could feel all this death.
It happened before. It will happen again. It's just a question of when.
The question probably that a lot of people are asking out there, okay, that are listening to us tonight, the question they're probably asking is, well, if this object comes around every 319 through 20 through 324, around that orbit of about 324 years, how come we haven't seen any destruction, let's say, in the last 400 years? We haven't heard of any destructions or any tidal waves of such, or any earth-shaking events that are recorded. How come we haven't seen that? So
well,
how would you
actually there is some events that are misrecorded. We just never labeled it to this coming through our solar system. See, if Earth, the only time it gets close to Earth, if Earth is in the position of the month of Passover, which is March or April, when it's made its round around the sun, and it's also in the month of March or April. That's when it comes close. That's when it's the most severe.
Now, it doesn't always pass close to Earth. It makes its orbit around the sun. Earth, it's only if Earth is in the same month or zone that is crossing, because it comes in, let's say, at the end of August, circles the sun and exits around March. So if Earth happens to be in those months at the time, then we have some of these major events that's also documented in the Bible and many other cultures.
Just before the exodus of Egypt, we know that there was a planet where the asteroid belt is, because it's the spacing of the planets are not random. It's a Fibonacci sequence using the series of 3. And it says right where the asteroid belt, which is where there's a remnant of a planet called Ceres, that is a destroyed planet that formed that asteroid belt right there. This planet 7X plowed into Ceres. At that time, because it slowed, that forward speed was dropped to 1/20th of its normal forward speed. One of the moons of Planet X was able to break free from its gravity-held position prior to the exodus. And that later formed what we call Venus today. There is no document that states Venus existed prior to the exodus. Now, as it goes around the sun, it's going many times slower. It caused a 3-day of darkness. And from that, and you can relate to the other comments that it says the river turning red and a bunch of other things that it says can be caused by this object. And what's interesting, now it had to pass 4 other times around the sun to gain back its normal speed. So it's going 1/20th its normal speed outward. So it only is able to go out far enough to where it comes back 52 years later. That is Joshua's long day. So it goes around the sun and picks up a little bit more speed. It comes back 131 years later, which is Job's trouble and the drought of Ruth. It was a 10-year drought because it was coming slower. So it went around the sun, picked up a little bit more speed. 290 years later, that was David and King Saul. At the end of King Saul's reign, he had 3.5-year drought. At the beginning of David's reign, he had another 3.5 year, total of 7. The next time it passed around, it brought its speed up to 358 years. That's when the time of Hezekiah, Jonah of Nineveh, and 185,000 Assyrian soldiers dying. That happened all at the same time right there. and that's where it reached its normal orbit, approximate orbit again. But it took 4 times around the sun before it regained its full speed again. If we follow the timeline, you can see where it keeps somewhat of a decent pattern between, unless it's bumping into a planet or a moon, then that will needs to disturb its orbit. If we look at the biggest case is when Ceres was destroyed at Exodus, you can see how it came back 52 years later for Joshua's long day, then 131 days for Job and Ruth, and 290 days to King David and Saul, and finally meets a normal orbit now, a 358, which is Hezekiah. And remember how the year changed now from 360 to 365. The reason why, because we had room to move, because the planets are locked in a magnetic trough, if you want to call it. Well, Ceres is destroyed, so that allowed expansion of our, if you wish to call it, the trough. So the next time it passed close to Earth, it dragged us outward a little bit, giving us a greater distance to go around the sun. That's why it changed from 360 to 365 and a quarter globally in every culture, not just biblical. Well, the orbit of this object holds just like a train on a track. It's always going to pass in the same track. But Earth has 12 months that it's orbiting around the sun in a different position.
Yeah.
So Earth can be in a different position at the time of the crossing. But that's where we have meteor showers later on, months later, that end up causing devastation. Now, Earth will still go through a drought and still suffer bird and fish kill. This is why the ancient legend associate bad luck with comets. Because this object looks like a comet from a distance, but it's many times larger.
It wouldn't have looked like a comet, though, when it came between Earth and the moon, though, would it?
Exactly. It would have looked like a planet-sized object, but they didn't have the word planet yet in their vocabulary.
So basically, Gil, based on all the previous passages of this object, it's like you said, it's like a Russian roulette. It's like a shooting gallery. It is all about location, and location. Where is the Earth?
Yes.
In relation to this object when it comes by. So apparently, these last passages that we talked about in relation to the Bible stories, the Earth was not that close when it came by, and there were some consequences, some asteroids, meteors hitting the Earth, and so forth, and some tilting of the Earth, but nothing really catastrophic that destroyed life like in the days of Noah. And I had read that several times, and I had never connected the dots between the event in Noah's days and the event in Revelation. That is the same amount of time, 5 months. And when you begin to connect these dots, it makes a whole world of sense. And it is fascinating in the sense that the Almighty uses these celestial events to bring about cataclysms on the earth, or maybe they come and the Lord uses them to bring about whatever ends He needs to bring about. And there is a misconception out there in the world, that God doesn't need Planet X, He doesn't need this, He doesn't need that, and that is true. He doesn't need, but He uses many times these celestial objects, and the Bible talks about how the Lord has given the celestial objects and the constellations as a sign for mankind here on planet Earth.
Well, we have multiple eyewitness accounts that we can literally build models with now. And it proves out their comments that they experienced and witnessed. And that is impossible for the time period. They had no concept of Kepler's laws of planetary motion or the forces ruling the universe. For them to get this that accurate as they claimed in the Bible is impossible. They saw a real object that caused real events for the time period.
As you were talking, you're reminding me of the patriarch Job. He said, "Hast thou seen the treasures of the hail, folks, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war?" That's, I think it's Job 38:22 through 23. You know, think about Psalm 148:7-8. These verses really are saying that the Lord's creation fulfills his word. So, you know, if we go by Bible prophecy, every single prophecy in the Bible, Gil, has come to pass, and the ones that haven't, I mean, it's got a pretty good track record, doesn't it?
Exactly. A lot greater than what people give it credit for.
You know, it's so interesting that the Apostle Peter used the exact same word in his epistle in 2 Peter 3:10 as the Lord used in Matthew 24:35. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away. Now, if you do a study on that Koine Greek sentence, it literally could be interpreted, Gil, as pass by, fly past. It goes on to say, with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Now, can our listeners even imagine the tremendous heat, fire, and smoke that would be generated all over the earth when this happens? Add to this situation the red hot flaming rocks and the asteroids that would fall on the earth during the passing of planet X. If you compare Revelation 6:12 through 17 and compare it with the account of Israel's coming out of the land of Egypt some 3,400 years ago, notice also in prophecy, the Lord explicitly states he is bringing the day of the Lord as a destruction from the Almighty. And if you look, and I think this is where people have to wrap their head around this, it talks about stars, the constellations, the sun, the moon, the earth. It seems like it's referring to moving the earth out of its present orbit. It's almost without a shadow of a doubt that the prophecy is describing the coming of Planet X and other heavenly bodies into the solar system, doesn't it?
Without a doubt, it's called the fiery dragon of old. Okay, and it is probably, when you're talking about an inanimate object, it's the most talked about object in the Bible, the most talked about object, and we're just coming to this conclusion that is there and that it's real, because you can go look through the Bible and find 7-year droughts multiple times. According to the data that the Bible is predicting, I'm not in the predicting business, but I'm looking at what it's predicting to see if it's logical in a model. Okay? Mm-hmm. Tells me that these books in the Bible are not random. It's giving us an end result. Each story is giving us data to piece together what the end result would be, because it made a comment that this will be the worst time for Earth in its history of Earth. Knowing Noah's flood, that's pretty an extreme statement. That's an extreme statement. Yeah. Okay. So, as it approaches, Earth is going to enter into the plasma field slowly, losing its rotational speed at 5.5%, eventually coming to a stop. That model, there's only a biblical model. There's no outside model for scientists to use. Therefore, they will predict the wrong half of the Earth being hit by a meteorite shower, a meteor shower. They will predict the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. That's 2/3 of the continental crust. Bible clearly tells us a model that is 1/3.
What led you, as you were in your research in this 3.5-year journey, what led you down to stumbling upon this white paper report, and what exactly is this white paper report?
This white paper report, the reevaluation of Eastern and Western records of the supernova of 1054, said that the supernova was not really a supernova, that it was seen earlier than that date, what was documented, and that this object moved through multiple constellations. Well, a supernova doesn't move through multiple constellations, it's stationary. The supernova of 1054, in the report given out by the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies, prove without a doubt that the object that they saw during this 26-month period was actually a planetary body. The closest approach that it came at that time was not as close as it has in the past, but what they saw on that year was equal to the size of Jupiter in the night sky, but as broad as Venus, and it had a comet-like tail. Without that study, we wouldn't be having the concrete information to be able to plot a segment of its course, to make these overlays that spells out that these people in the ancient writings actually saw something that we can match to a model now.
What I'm talking about evidence, I'm talking about what day, time, and place on Earth that it was seen, what constellation, what radius, what direction of travel, what's the brightness of it, and was it by any known stars, and what angle from that known star. The only one to give us that type of detailed information is the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean records. Their astronomy goes back just a few hundred years after Noah's flood. That's how far their astronomy goes. Now, and what that did was it proved that our assumptions that it was the supernova, that it ended up proving it wrong, that this object was actually moving through the night skies, as documented by the Chinese and the Korean and the Japanese astronomers. And so when I read the article, I decided to attempt to plot its orbit, because the data was so, they had done such a good job in stating where the object was, the brightness, the time, the year, the day, all of the criteria that we need to try to have a plot of this orbit. And they had multiple sightings of it within a 26-month period. And so out of that, what astounded me was that the plot of its orbit ended up matching the biblical parameters, where like in Noah's flood it says it's 150 days between the time that it started raining to the time the flood started to recede. Mm-hmm. And that's equal to the same time frame as in Revelation, where it says from CO6 to CO7 that they'll wish death for 5 months, but death will not come. Well, 5 months is equivalent to 150 days.
Wow.
And this object is plotted coming into the month of Passover and exiting, well, it comes in the end of August. It goes around the sun, and then it exits during the month of Passover. And that was quite astounding and shocking whenever you find actual white paper reports that match or mirrors a biblical event or an object that's occurring in the same way as the biblical accounts are. That was quite astounding and shocking whenever you find actual white paper reports that match or mirrors a biblical event or an object that's occurring in the same way as the biblical accounts are.
So, but how do we trust your source of Chinese data?
Okay. First, let's remove ourselves from politics and just examine the science. Okay? We're looking at hundreds of year difference. The communist government we have in China did not exist at that time. It was an emperor. Emperor wanted straight data
from the astronomers, otherwise they lost their heads. So are the astronomers motivated to do the job right? You bet. Have we used their data in the past to prove that they are accurate? Thousands of times. It is a known fact that the Chinese astronomers working for the emperor did accurate work. The data that I'm using is a scientific white paper, not hearsay. It's called, and I'll give you the title right here and who the authors were and the publisher. Publisher is Pergamon. The article is called A Reevaluation of the Eastern and Western Records of the Supernova of 1054. Author is Breen and MacArthur. This is done in Ireland by the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies that published this article. They show without a doubt that the 1054 supernova was not a supernova, that this object is documented in the Chinese record as moving, and they documented where it was sighted, in what constellation, in what month, as it moved. This object moved on the planetary plane, and it matches the 150-day model that I was showing you. And we can also look at a report by Matisse and Whitmire from the UL University, a white paper. They talk about what area of space that the comets orbits or warped by a gravitational body. That they estimate it's outside the solar system, but that is an estimate. That is not rooted in fact. You have to guess where it's at, but what's factual about their report is the orbits of the comets are warped and the area of space that is documented that is being warped at.
Okay, Noah's flood, we had touched on the subject that it was 150 days between the start of the flood and when the water started to recede. When an impact from a large meteorite hit the Earth and 91% of our crust was knocked into space from the opposite side, it is, because crust at the time, and still is, crust is only held on by gravity because it's not glued on. That's why we have continental drift. And therefore, the water could recede to the depression, which are our oceans today. And that model, again, proves out without violating any planetary laws. Well, during Noah's flood, yes, the Gulf of Mexico is the largest impact crater known. Scientists have a little problem with it, of accepting it, because they visualize the model as a dry Earth scenario, like it is today, and that an impact that large, there's two levels of heat, one from the blast, and a secondary heat wave, which is caused by a frequency that it emits in such a large blast that violently vibrates carbon molecules to where they spontaneously combust. So all plant life, animal life, human life would disappear on Earth. They would have a ring of fire that would go all the way around Earth and dissipate life on it, on this planet. But under a scenario of a flooded Earth, that heat is canceled out. See, there's outside text that says 7 floodgates in heaven opened up. 7 meteors hit the Earth when this canopy of water was above us, causing the floodgates of heaven to open. That's more than a normal rain. And it took 40 days for it to empty out. Then the Earth stays flooded 150 days. At the end of the 50 days, you can read where there's a great wind that came over the Earth, and then Noah noticed that the water was receding. That wind was the pressure wave from the impact of this Gulf of Mexico. it hit at the time the earth was flooded. See, earth is crossing two debris fields 150 days apart during Noah's flood. The first debris field collapsed the canopy of water. The earth is flooded 150 days, and then earth crosses the second debris field, where a large, fiery, mountain-sized object hits the earth, making the Gulf of Mexico, knocking off 71% of our crust. And in turn, the water was able to recede, as it states in the text. There was a great wind that came over the earth. That was the pressure wave from the blast. And then water receded to this void, which is what we would call the ocean today. It says this would be like the time of Noah. And we didn't know to what extent he meant that comment meant that. But it's just like in Noah's time, we can say that a fiery mountain hit the earth on the second event, 5 months later. That's what caused the Gulf of Mexico. That created the moon and allowed the water to recede. That's what's mentioned in Revelation. It says after seal 6 that they'll wish death for 5 months, but death won't come until the 5th month. In modern time, that would be 152 and 1/8 day. Because remember, the calendar during Noah's time was 360 years. Earth's orbit around the sun was slightly tighter. So it was 360-day year. After Hezekiah, we went outward slightly to 365 and a quarter day. So today that would relate to 152 and 1/8 day, which is the 5 months. He's stating that's within the 5 month period stated there. So yes, it relates. The next one after that is the Tower of Babel. And in the Talmud, again, gives us additional historical information on this event. It says that the top of the tower was burned, the lower part of the tower sank into the sand like liquefaction, just what we would expect. And the burning, I'm assuming that the burning was caused by a meteorite shower on the top. And it says only the center section is left for people to view. Well, if you go on Google Earth and look south of the ancient city of Baghdad, that's actually the mid-kingdom. If you look further south than that, that's where the old kingdom used to be during the time of this tower. And you see the outline of a square that is the base of the ancient ziggurat of Tower of Babel. And it has a moat around it, a water moat, because the base has sunken into the sand, leaving you this void to be filled up with water. So the data is checking out on this one. And then with the science information with the planet, we have a reason on what took place. Because remember, the ziggurat is made out of stone. So how can the top burn if it's made out of stone?
Exactly.
And brick.
Yeah.
But a meteor shower that'd be a pretty good description of it.
Now, could this also have caused what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah? Because we know that there was definitely a rock or some type of a huge explosion that just wiped out that whole area there. Not just Sodom and Gomorrah, but also other cities that are mentioned in the Bible. Was this also a result of the passing nearby of this celestial object at that time?
Now, this is where the data gets a little sketchy. My personal opinion, I believe it to be true. But there's a little bit of a conflict between the age of Abraham and and I'm finding out that if we go with the astronomical date, I believe that I can fit this in where Solomon and Mr. Gomorrah was at the same time as the Tower of Babel, but just in a different area. Tower of Babel was in Iraq. Solomon and Gomorrah was at the southern end of the Dead Sea, both being hit by meteorite showers at the same time. You see? And we know that Abraham left Babylon and traveled somewhere in Israel because he was fairly near Solomon and Gomorrah to be able to rescue Lot. Remember how Lot, and he was warned by the angel to go over the mountain, that it was not safe in the valley. And he told him not to look back. His wife, okay, there was 2 cities, not one. There was 2 that were destroyed. So when they got to the point where they were over the mountain, the first city goes up. The Lot's wife hears the explosion. So she turns around and goes around where she was protected and shielded from the rock. You know, the rock was shielding her from the blast. She went around the rock, and at the same time, the second city was detonated, was going off. Any super large explosion like a meteorite, if you're close enough, you're vaporized. Just like it would be an atomic explosion, but it wasn't an atomic explosion, but it's like an atomic. She was vaporized. Right. Now, if you take a look at what happened in Nagasaki, there's people's shadows that are still there today on the cement wall where they used to stay because they were vaporized. This is what happened to Lot's wife. Her shadow was the only thing left. And the way that they wrote it, remember, it doesn't say God turned it to a pillar of salt. It's the observers that are writing on what they saw. She was turned to because they could see the perfect outline of her.
Right.
She was turned to because they had no explanation at the time. They didn't have a word like vaporization. They didn't even know what happened to her. They just saw the only thing left was a shadow, and that was probably her right there. Okay? That's how it's explained in the Bible, because you have to separate what God said happened and what the observer is witnessing.
Now,
they're only using the words that they have. Remember, brimstone was the account of the Bible. If you read the details a little bit, he tells them not to turn around and to clear the area before they can do any of the destructions. Lot's wife didn't listen. There was 2 towns that got destroyed. After the first blast, she came back around because she missed her town there, and then she got exposed to the second blast. Well, if you look to the bottom left, right here, these are pictures in, Japan during the. If you look at these Nagasaki, Hiroshima, these are people and items that were vaporized, where it leaves their shadow left on the stone, because everything around them, all the dust in the rock or in the stone was vaporized out of the rock, therefore it's bleached. And wherever the person was standing is still grayish. So it leaves a perfect outline of the human beings. You can see on the steps here where a human being was sitting when he got vaporized. And then the wind would blow their ashes away. So the only thing left is a shadow. Same thing happened to Lot's wife. When she came around the corner, she got exposed. The second blast exploded, vaporizing her. Her ashes are blown away. Then they come look for her later, and they see this perfect outline of her. They said, the Almighty turned it to a pillar of salt. It's man's description, not God's description of what he did. It's man's description.
Abraham was 75 years old when he left Babylon, bringing his nephew Lot and their families with him. Upon entering the land, Lot joined himself to a prosperous culture that had developed on this then fertile plain. Lot took up residence in the city of Sodom. The prophet Ezekiel said that the sin of Sodom was pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness. She did not strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. They were haughty and committed abominations. Sorry for this rude interruption, but if you want to know how to get on the bad side of the Almighty, search the scriptures for what God calls an abomination. The word abomination is translated from the harshest words in the Hebrew language, toavah and sheketz, and they mean perverted, disgusting, repulsive, sick, putrid, vile. You get the picture. Their self-indulgent lifestyle led to a perversion named after the city, sodomy, commonly known today as homosexuality. Abraham was forewarned that the sin of Sodom might have reached the point that divine intervention was required. Two angels who appeared as men left Abraham's tent to see what was transpiring in the city of Sodom. Upon arrival, the angels were welcomed into the home of Lot. But an aroused group of homosexual men demanded that Lot send these strangers out to them so that they could rape them. Lot refused, so they attacked him on his front porch. The angels pulled Lot to safety inside the house and smote the entire mob with blindness. The scriptures record that they wore themselves out as they groped the house looking for the door. At sunrise, the angels took Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters by the hands, dragging them away from the city. Soon, fire and brimstone rained down from heaven, turning the city into a raging inferno. That is when some scientists believe that the 3,000-mile Great Rift Valley was formed, when the Earth's crust fractured and belched fire and brimstone into the heavens. As the brimstone showered down upon the cities, Abraham saw the smoke of Sodom rise up in the distance. But until the smoke cleared, Abraham had no idea that Lot was saved from destruction. These 4 locations have yielded the same ashen features and brimstone remains that we see here in the city of Gomorrah. The brimstone found here is unique to this part of the earth. Samples have been analyzed in laboratories in the U.S. and also in one of the most prestigious laboratories in the world, the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, which awards the Nobel Prize in the field of science. Critical analysis showed this sulfur to be 95.72% pure sulfur with 3 other trace metals which could generate sufficient heat to melt even stainless steel. Moses referred to the condition of this area by saying, "The Lord overthrew Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim in his anger and wrath. The whole land is brimstone and salt and ashes. It is not sown, nor bears fruit, nor grows any grass." This is a natural mineral salt lick, the salt of which Moses spoke. Mineral salts from the bodies of the incinerated citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah continue to leach to the surface even after 4,000 years. After the atomic bombs were dropped that ended World War II in the Pacific, U.S. military inspectors at Hiroshima found piles of white powder near the blast site. Analysis proved the powder to be the mineral salts of the incinerated individuals who were vaporized in the fireball. All that was left was a pile of salt. That discovery and the salt licks of Sodom and Gomorrah may answer the question, what became of Lot's wife? The scriptures indicate she turned back to the doomed city and became not a literal pillar, but in the Hebrew, a memorial of salt. All that's left of her and the entire population is the mineral salts which the desert gazelle now eat.
At the same time of Job was it's the account of Ruth and Naomi. If you read the story, it was about between 7 to 10 year drought here, to where she had to go back into the land. And this was during the time of either Sabbath year or Jubilee, because she asked for her land back. So we can time this even, according to the biblical scale of 50 years. After that was Job's trouble. You can read how his flock and his shepherds were destroyed by fiery hail. In the next paragraph, there's a great wind that knocked down a house that his sons and daughters were in, and it killed them, which is the pressure wave from an impact. And this is how Job lost almost everything he had.
And during the same time, now, Egypt's territory went all the way up to the southern area of what we call today Turkey. Okay, it followed the coastline through Israel all the way to the southern regions of Turkey, or Lebanon and Syria and all of that. That was at that time, they ruled the markets in those areas. Job was around that area. He was around, Damascus area, around the Golan Heights, because that's where his son settled. Okay? If you read the story of Job, Job's trouble starts with a meteorite shower, where his flock and his shepherds are destroyed. And the house that his children was in collapsed, killing all his children.
Right.
This was caused by us going through the tail of the debris of this planet. Okay? Now, it may have been further away that Earth didn't tilt, right? Well, no, this is at the same time. I'm sorry. This is the same year and the same time frame as Joseph. Then the next event after that was the time of Joseph of Egypt. 7 days of plenty, 7 days of drought. Remember Joseph's dream where he said that he saw the moon and he saw 12 stars bowing to him?
Right.
Or 11 stars, I think it was, or 12. I took that as Leo being the sign of 11 with another planet there, giving it a 12, okay? And he saw these things bowing to him. They moved, okay? We always thought that was just a dream that never came, per se, true, that it only represented the actual descendants, his son, which it can be interpreted. But we've had 2 or 3 times that Earth is tilted. One time is during the time of Joseph. Remember? Now, you may ask, how do I know that Earth tilted? From an artifact in Germany called the Niebuhr disk.
Yeah, can you talk about it? Yeah, can you explain that a bit, Gil?
Sure.
The Niebuhr sky disk, unearthed around 1999 near Niebuhr, Saxony-Anhalt, Germany, and is associated with the Bronze Age of about 1600 BC, has been widely accepted since 2013 as the oldest concrete depiction of that time period's night sky. The Niebuhr disk has contributed to Gil's data, giving his models another fresh perspective of Planet X's multiple crossings.
What it proves out is that the Earth had an unusual eclipse of roughly 3 hours it frames the month of March with the constellation that shows a Gemini and Capricorn, and it shows an unusual item that we can't see in the month of April, which is the constellation Orion. You cannot see Mr. Orion from that latitude in Germany unless you're at the latitude of Luxor, Egypt, and that meant the Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. And we can pinpoint the year that this happened because of the arrangement of other stars and planets that are on that disk. And it also shows that the moon was not involved with this eclipse. The moon is shown in a crescent shape where it takes a new moon to make a solar eclipse. So it is showing us what clear that there was a third object involved that caused the Earth to tilt during this period of time.
That's our third object right there that he's looking at. Now, how do we know this? Okay. Well, remember when he was in later on when he was in Egypt during the drought. Remember, he was around age 40. By the time the mid of the drought came around. So, how can we prove this story that it actually did happen? Well, there's an artifact in Europe that's called the Nebra sky disk that was found in Germany in a Nebra colony, they called it, and there's the world Europe's oldest observatory that's about 20 miles or so northwest of it. And I believe that the disc was actually made at that ancient Miss Observatory. And this is a bronze disc with gold leaf, stars, sun, moon, and its horizon markers on it. And it's the oldest in the world that represents a group of stars or constellations that we can recognize. And when I first saw this, the museum text on this, I didn't agree with it, and I found some errors that they had missed.
Number one, they say the lower part of this disc is not the horizon in front. They make the claim that it's the Egyptian boat Styx that ferries the dead across the river. Well, I got a question. How did the Germans in mid of Europe ever go to Egypt to be able to get this information? And instead, when you go to Google, when you go to the site where the ancient Miss Observatory is, and look where they were looking at in the night sky, exactly in front of them is an old riverbed. They have a dam that closed off the riverbed. They had to reroute the river because of the dam, but if you put it where the old river is, that's exactly what was in front of the observer, which is at the base of the Nebra disk. Okay?
None of the experts caught that the moon was facing the wrong direction. That illuminated side has to be facing the sun. Therefore, they dated the crescent shape with the wrong date. Instead of saying that it was a 4-day-old moon, it was actually like a 26-day-old moon. And that makes a difference in trying to find the time period that this is pictured at using software. And then it showed the constellation to the left and to the right of it. And what it did was it framed to the right Capricorn and framed to the left Gemini. Well, it shows the sun on the left and it shows the moon to the right. Well, what's interesting is you cannot see the stars unless it's an eclipse. And the moon is the one that usually does the eclipse, causes the eclipse for the sun. But it can't be done in a crescent shape, as is shown on this disk. It can only take a new moon to darken the sun. So this is clearly showing that the moon is not involved with this eclipse, which the experts failed to pick up. That was the second point. At the bottom, it shows the constellation Orion, and from this latitude where the observatory is, you cannot see Mr. Orion from Germany at that latitude in the month of April, because it shows Capricorn to the right and Gemini to the left, and that's April according to that latitude. And the only way you could see Mr. Orion is if Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. It would give you a latitude of Luxor, Egypt.
The disk, they can pretty much say that it was from the Nibra colony, okay? And they had an ancient observatory there to where they could tell when the season started. So they were very in tune with the constellation and knowing when the year happened. You know, when they plant the crops, when the harvest. That's why you have these ancient observatories. Because if you miss the planting season, your town could starve. It was very important at the time to better know when to plant and when to harvest, and that's what these things would help them with. And this was the same time period as Joseph of Egypt, documented by the German astronomers.
Remember, he had that dream at age 16 when the skies bowed to him.
Yes.
Well, remember the drought you have with this object. You have 3.5 year drought coming in, 3.5 year drought as it leaves. Joseph was mid of the drought. And the date on the disk, when we go back in the software model, gives us a clear date on when this happened. It was the software gives us April 6th of 1810 BCE. Now you have to compensate. You have to subtract 16 years because the year actually changed at Hezekiah's time from 360 to 365 and a quarter, which is not compensated in the software. So you subtract 16 years from this, and you get 1794 BCE, April, which is the exact year it lands on Joseph, mid of the drought.
Wow.
The skies literally bowed to Joseph at age 40, because your perspective, standing on earth looking at the skies, that's exactly what you're seeing. The skies were bowing to him. The stars, the moon, and this illuminated object bowed to him. And this German disc confirms the story of Joseph, along with the software. The software also confirms the yearly change on Hezekiah. Globally, calendars changed, which is documented in over 80 countries, I believe, that within a year to year, within 2 years of that date, close to 80 different countries change their calendar to 365 and a quarter. And you see it on Hezekiah's seal, that the planet was passing. And the shadow going back 10 steps, the calculation gives us 26 to 28 degrees, but it's a north to south tilt. Same thing like Joseph. It was a north to south tilt. Because when the two planets come close together, this planet passed approximately halfway between the moon and the earth. And I know some of your guests would say, well, that's impossible because of gravity. Well, that's if you use the wrong model, that it's a gravity-ruled universe. The new model of the physicists say that we live in an electric universe, that gravity is the weaker force and magnetic fields are the stronger force. And that was proven out recently when a comet had passed by Mars. So the limit to gravity is actually called the Roche limit, which is 1.5 times the radius of a planet. That's where you get, anytime past that, you get geosynchronous orbit. Your satellites are not pulled back by gravity, because gravity it doesn't have enough force to pull it back. Now, when these two planets pass like that, the magnetic attraction is like two magnets, and they tilt toward each other. The opposite poles attract to each other. And you get a 26 to 28 degree tilt, which I can prove happened 4 times in history. One was at Noah's time. One was during Joseph's time. One was during Joshua's long day. And the other one was in Hezekiah's time.
After this event happened, we had the Exodus. Now that's what's interesting about this. This is where we can prove that it doesn't have it doesn't necessarily have a stable orbit, because we have items that it's able to collide with, like moons and planets and such. We have Pluto on outer edges that's at a very strange extreme tilt, and it used to be a moon to Neptune, is a common knowledge to that. So what hit it or bumped it to give it this extreme elliptical orbit at a steep angle? This particular planet is able to explain many of the anomalies we see in our universe. Well, just prior to the Exodus, it collided with what we call today Ceres. Ceres is the remnant of a destroyed planet, which is a part of the asteroid belt. And that is the debris field from this destroyed planet. And how do we know that? Well, you can use Fibonacci numbers, and using a series of 3, it shows you the exact spacing of each planet. And right where the debris field is, there's supposed to be a planet, according to the calculations. Well, this we can prove out scientifically with this model again.
Phaeton is a hypothetical planet. What happened to Phaeton was a catastrophic event that tore the planet apart, sending its fragments flying out into space. These fragments then became the asteroid belt that now exists between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. So, our first Planet X system flyby scenario will be a Phaeton event. Here we see Earth on the opposite side of the Sun, but poor Phaeton is a bone to be chewed as Nibiru and Nemesis close in on it. This, we postulate, was the destructive force that tore poor Phaeton apart.
Well, when it came in, it collided with Ceres, slowing the forward speed of Planet X to about 1/20th of its normal speed. And as it went around the sun, when it came around, that's when the Exodus happened. That was the 3 days of darkness. This is similar to the 3 hours of darkness during Yeshua's sacrifice. But that was going at normal speed. That was only 3 hours of darkness, just like the Nebra disk. It was 3 hours of darkness. But right here was 3 days of darkness, because it's only traveling at 1/20th. That's a normal speed. And it took 4 more passes around the sun before it gained to a somewhat normal orbit of 358.
Visitors who take the Universal Studios tour of the Red Sea scene from the movie, The 10 Commandments, are given a great insight to a real feat of cinema magic. However, when we remove the magic and the allegory from the story and reorder the plagues in scientific order, the first plague of Exodus becomes number 7, thunder and hail. What the reordered story of Exodus tells us is that meteorite showers falling on us from the dust disk surrounding Nemesis is the first plague. This plague will repeat itself as Earth is pelted by this dust disk. We'll see meteorite showers the likes of which we could not imagine. The damage of these meteorites will be substantial and long-lasting because they'll contain something called Schrebersite, a deadly combination of iron, nickel, and phosphorus only found in meteoric iron. The iron in the Schrebersite is what caused the first plague in the biblical account, namely the turning of the waters to blood. To understand why, simply visit a local brickyard. They'll tell you that in order to make those wonderful red bricks we use to decorate our homes with, they add iron to the mix. This is why the iron in the Schrebersite will once again turn our waters to the color of blood, and it will result in a dramatic reduction in potable drinking water for all of us. Meanwhile, the phosphorus in the Schrebersite, plus warmer surface temperatures, such as those we're already seeing these days, will trigger huge blooms of blue-green algae. These algae blooms will generate vast amounts of microcystin, which is highly toxic and can kill plants, animals, and humans. And here in our illustration of the Exodus scenario, we find Earth on the opposite side of the Sun, just as it was during the Phaeton event scenario, with one notable exception. This time, there is no Phaeton. So, what we've seen with these first two scenarios is that Earth was fortunate enough to be on the other side of the Sun during this final stage of the Planet X system flyby. So, what happens if we're not so lucky the next time?
Now this is King Saul and David. This is how we get the Star of David. This was the planet that was passing. You had 3.5 years of drought at the end of Saul's reign. You had 3.5-year drought at the beginning of King David's reign. Again, 7-year drought. After that, you get Jonah's warning to Nineveh. This was the same time frame around as Hezekiah, but this was 40 days earlier. You know, what's interesting with this story is what's not being said. Jonah did not perform one miracle. Jonah did not commit one miracle, but yet an entire town of 20 or 30,000 people believed him and went into misrepentance mode, even the king. Why? Try that today. Go to a town and say repent. In 40 days, your doom comes, and see what you'd get. Well, the reason why is because they were in tune with nature. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have CNN or Fox News. Okay, so they paid attention to the environment around them. They saw earthquakes or felt earthquakes. They saw probably volcanoes or heard of them going off, which was very unusual. They saw the seasonal change. They saw bird and fish killed. They saw their crops dying of drought and severe. And they wanted to know what was going on that was changing everything. Jonah just had to come up at, the model shows us at 40 days, it just rounded the sun. And you can clearly see it from Earth now. Now it's heading towards Earth.
Remember Yeshua said the only sign that a wicked and adulterous generation will have was the sign of Jonah.
Yes.
40-day. So that's alluding that the majority of the earth would not have a warning at 40 days. That would be the majority. But I think his people will have a warning slightly above that because they're paying attention.
Right.
But the rest of the world will be waiting for the government to announce to them that this is a real object. Now,
the only thing Jonah had to do was go and point in the sky, because exactly at 40 days, this is what the software shows us. At 40 days, it's just rounded the sun. Earth is here. Planet X is just coming out from around the sun. You get a direct line up with it, and that's what they were able to see. It was the first sighting of Planet X for them. 40-day warning without a telescope. That's what worried them, and that's when they went into misrepentance. The whole town repented. It's included the king, because they knew something was wrong.
You bet. This is amazing, Gil. I'm serious. This is fascinating.
this seal was found, and it has on it where the inscription says, belonging to Hezekiah, son of Asher, king of Judah. And if you look at it carefully, it shows a winged disc in the center of it.
I see that.
All right. Remember how I showed you on page 3 of the graphic where I showed the shadow went backward, how Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees, just like the Nebra disk of Joseph of Egypt. It shows that Earth tilted 23 to 26 degrees. I can prove Earth tilted 4 times in its history now. And in Hezekiah's seal, he was given 15 more years to live. On his seal, he put this winged disc. The wings just show movement or flight in the sky, the disc showing our planet, that it was significant, and it changed the calendars to 360 to 365 and a quarter days.
As we start studying the planet Earth, we first of all discover something strange about the ancient calendars. It turns out the ancient calendars, like the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Chinese, the Mayan, the Hindus, the Carthaginians, the Etruscans, and the Teutons, all of them were built on a presumption of 30-day months, 360-day years. And they apparently worked fine for quite a while, until about 701 BC. In 701 BC, it seems that all these calendars get revised, get changed. The Romans do their thing, they add a few days. The Hebrews add a month every 3 years or so. And the rabbis, the libraries are full of conjectures by rabbis as why did Hezekiah adopt that weird way to bring the solar year into coincidence with the mean sidereal year. It's not every 3 years, by the way, it's a more complicated formula. But basically it's 7 times every 19 years to bring things into place. Well, what happened? You get the impression something happened that year. But as we look at the original 360 days, the Veda text in India assumed 360-day years. In Persia, 360-day years. In the 7th century, they add 5 days. In Chaldea, of course, 360 days. We know that from the biblical record. In Genesis and Revelation, it assumes a 360-day calendar. In Assyria, it was the 360-day calendar. In Egypt, they had 12 30-day months and eventually had 5 days. And I won't go through all. There's lists and lists of these. Now, what I'm leading up to is some scholars have noted that in the Old Testament, there are a series of catastrophes.
So that's additional confirmation of what I was telling you, that this planet passed during Hezekiah and Jonah's time period.
We have an error in the English Bible. It says like a sundial going east to west.
Remember when the shadow had went backwards in some people's text, it may mention that it was a sundial. Well, the math and the science doesn't work well with a sundial. So we went back to the Hebrew to check, and it says the shadow went backwards on steps. And that made a lot more sense, because if you face the steps north and south, you have a tilt of the Earth of 26 to 28 degrees, which is proven out in 2 other incidences in history that I can find, that the Earth has tilted before, of 26 to 28 degrees.
A sundial would not work, because that meant for the shadow to reverse east to west, that meant the Earth had to come to a screeching halt in its rotation, back up 10 degrees or whatever on a sundial, stop again, travel 4 to 5 times faster forward to regain the time that is lost, because there's no mention of any delay in time right here. So a sundial does not work. So when I went and looked at the Hebrew text says it's 10 steps, like steps on a stair. Well, that makes a little sense. If we take a step and face it south, not east to west, we again have a 26 to 28 degree tilt of Earth, like the Nebra disk. The shadow would have reversed 10 steps and then went back forward without any time difference. There would be no delay or forwarding of time. The Earth tilted again. I mean, it passed close. It didn't pass behind Earth. It passed probably in front of it. Now, during this time period, 687 BC, that this had happened. Because if it had been east to west, like in the sundial, the oceans would have covered the continents.
Let me help people just in layman's terms. There are folks saying, I don't get the point. Here's the point. It's impossible for the sun to move backwards unless the earth shifted. And in the Bible, the sun, the reflection, I should say, the shadow of the sun went backwards 10 steps or 10 degrees, if you will. And for that to happen, the earth had to tilt. And it did happen. It's in the Bible. It was a significant sign. And Gil, why did the earth tilt, in your opinion?
Because the object came within midway between the moon and the earth again. This has happened 4 times in its past. And the magnetic attraction between the North and South Pole caused the two objects to tilt. It takes about 6 hours for Earth to tilt and another 6 hours for it to go back to its normal disposition.
So only thing you're saying, the only thing you're saying that could cause the earth to do that would have to be an object going by so big and so powerful that it would tilt the earth.
We have Haggai. At this time, they had neglected to build Yehovah's temple. They only had a tent, I believe. They went ahead and built their fine homes and the wall around Jerusalem, and they just had the tent, but they never built the temple. The Almighty God mad at them and said, "You will work through the Sabbath," which is a Sabbath year here. He said, "You will not get rest because you didn't build my temple, and I'm going to send an earthquake so bad that it'll throw a driver out of his chariot." He said that he would shake the world. During this exact same time, this is when Alexander the Great is taking Tyre. After he built that land bridge to Tyre, he was trying to breach the wall. He had problems. It says meteors came out of the sky, or fiery hail, broke up into 4 or 5, and collided into the wall of Tyre, knocking it down. So Alexander could go in. The meteors came from our planet passing by. Let's see, after that, we're going to go into secular history. And what we have here is, the next one is Constantine. Remember that object that Constantine saw? It was claimed to be a cross in the sky.
Yes.
Constantine's symbol was a cross, an X with a P in the center. The cross wasn't created yet. Constantine was a sun worshiper. You can look at the coins here that were printed after he had seen this. This is the deity of the sun, and this is the object that he saw coming around the sun. It was documented in October. They're not sure when he saw the sign. They say it could be 2 or 3 months before or after. But he didn't have a cross at the time. Okay, his symbol was let's see, this emblem right here. It's an X with a P. And that what's interesting is Constantine wasn't converted as people say he was.
Sure.
The coins minute after this event, you see this other entity behind his face right here?
Oh, yeah.
That's called, that's the sun god Mithra. He was a sun worshiper to the day he died. You can also see the sunbursts they have in these other. This also would happen whenever a comet is coming straight at you here at an angle. You'd see a star like a starburst as this object is coming into our inner inner solar system, he would see it. This fits the time, the time frame. This is called the old fiery dragon of old, you know. Now after this, around 707, is the collapse of the civilization of the Mayan and Aztecs.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of their population died of a severe drought. It was so severe that scientists speculate, or archaeologists speculate, about 90% of their population died. Now, what's interesting is if we take a closer look at their calendar, the outer ring of their calendar, if you take, remember this is carved in rock, doesn't that look like a comet right here?
It sure does.
If you pair these up as an entry and an exit, you have just about as many times as I've spotted in history. And the American Indians call this the blue Kachina and the red
Oh yeah,
Kachina.
blue Kachina. I've heard this. Yeah.
The blue could be the plasma having a bluish color. The red could be meteorites or meteors coming in. So, you know, even though the age, you know, different cultures call it different things.
The Blue Kachina prophecy tells us that we will see a blue object in the sky which will be a harbinger of trouble. Following that, we will see a red Kachina and it will cause a great suffering for us.
Now remember where they have a long count and a short count in the calendar that there was a lot of talk about?
Mm-hmm.
I found out that there's other counts that they're not telling us about, but I don't have access to these other counts. But if you take the last count, which was a Baktun, 394 years, and add it to the year that Constantine saw his object, was in 312, that gives you a year of 707, which is mid of the drought. Okay, so that meant 3.5 years earlier is when the drought started. Archaeologists date this massive drought starting around the 700s. It exactly adds up. I believe the Mayans were, this is an event calendar, and that they were documenting the time span between each event.
Mm.
And that's why you'd have multiple counts. And that's why the last count was between the time of Constantine to the time they died out. And just like the Chinese were misobsessed with the skies,
Stars as well,
so
yeah.
were the Mayans. And that's why they were misobsessed. They were trying to give themselves times to prepare for this object coming in.
It's a good point to make,
So they
Gil,
could-
is that the Mayans and the Chinese were obsessed. Let's make no mistake, they were fully obsessed about the skies, and there is only one thing that explains that obsession. People think we're obsessed with the skies. I mean, look at all our technology. We're not exactly obsessed with the heavens. I mean, all hands were on deck in those days for the astronomy. They
Sure.
were an astronomy culture. It was all hands on deck.
What it was documented in the Chinese documents. If a astronomer was caught sleeping at his post, they had 2 astronomers after a large feast were caught sleeping at their post, and the guards misreported it to the emperor. He had their heads cut off because he wanted accurate information.
Wow.
Anything that happened in the skies, he wanted it documented. And so obviously he wasn't just using it to tell his horoscope, was he?
No.
There was something important that he felt he needed to know. And This is the reason why the elite want to know. It's the same reason why the elite today want to know.
Mm-hmm.
So they can gather the food they need for their own family members or their own government.
It explains all these seed vaults. It's not just the one in Norway. There's a couple of them dotted around the place.
Yes, yes. And if you, only thing a person has to do is connect the dots.
Yeah.
Now, after this event here is where, this is only around 960 so years ago that the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese astronomers saw it. This is well documented. You can see how they almost are in line. They saw this object for 26 months. 13 months coming in and 13 months leaving.
Wowzer.
You know. And after the Mayans, we have the Chinese incident in 1054, where they documented that the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese, all three of these documented this object. If you look in most of Asian culture, see how they have a dragon? I had personally taken this picture when I was in Beijing, where they have these large bronze bells. You can see where this shape of the dragon in the center, they got a circular object with lightning coming off of it, it seems like. That's our object. They were very fascinated with the stars as well. And they show this. And so I did a quick study to start out with, and I said, if this item ever really existed, it should have been noted by the Chinese astronomers, because their documents go back almost 4,000 years. And I stumbled across a study, and that study, I can give you the name of it, was called the Reevaluation of the Eastern and Western Records of the supernova of 1054. And I can share the screen here to show some of you viewers of it. Let me show this.
Yeah.
All right. This is, are you able to see this?
Not yet.
Okay, it's taking a little while.
It's all right.
Well, it comes from the Dublin Institute of, Advanced Studies.
Yeah.
And what they prove is that we had an assumption earlier in the previous century that that some of the data that we were misreviewing pertaining to the supernova of 1054, that we had claimed that it was a supernova. But when we went back and more recently looked at the Chinese documents, some of this data did not correlate with a supernova, because it showed, without a doubt, an object moving to multiple constellations. A supernova is stationary. Therefore, it cannot move from a different it has to be stationary in one constellation. And come to find out that the supernova actually was seen two to 3 months earlier. And that this data was actually what they call it a guest star, that the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Korean astronomers had seen in 1054 AD, that this was a sizable object. And that's what caught my attention. And I said it was so well documented that I was going to make an attempt to plot its course.
On this, you are talking about the one they refer to as Nibiru, yeah?
Well, yes, it has probably over 30, 40 names, maybe more.
All right.
Depending on what culture and time period, because it's pretty much been here throughout the eons of time here, making its path. And what I was able to prove that is this object does not really have a stable orbit, and that if you were to pull a set time out of the hat, that the 3,600 year orbit does not apply to this. it would be closer to 360 years.
Really?
And
Well, for once, another point is that I'm the first one to get actual scientific data from the Chinese or anywhere that's actually verifiable in a model. Okay? This is not hearsay. This is from a scientific report that's been through the peer review. And they list it as a NEO, a near-Earth object. But when I plotted it, I found out that it was the biblical model, and this is going to be our Planet X.
And after that, we come to 1378, where there was this, during the Dark Ages, during the plagues of the Black Plague and everything, it passed at the beginning and at the end, Dark Ages. Right here, there's a painting. They say that this is Halley's Comet. Well, we have a problem with that because Halley's Comet does not cause a meteor shower. You can, because there's two objects showing like a tail of a comet in the painting.
Very interesting.
And the circumstances in the painting don't relate to Halley's Comet.
Okay, yeah.
They're showing starvation or famine of some type because they're holding their stomachs, the people in the painting. You see trees snapped in half like from a massive earthquake or winds.
Wow.
Then you have uplifted ground where the town is raised.
Far out.
You have fiery hail coming from heaven that's putting some of the buildings on fire. And you can tell that there was an earthquake because some of the buildings are knocked down.
Wow.
That's not typical with Halley's Comet.
Great.
And so this was during the Dark Ages. And this is one of the reasons why it was called so dark, because it was devastating to the local inhabitants of Earth in that region of Europe and such. And then when we go back, the next event was 241 years later, in 1697. Well, this was during the time of Newton. This is about the mid-age of Newton's reign on Earth. Well, we have a wood carving from Germany that shows two objects the size of the sun, showing extreme brightness, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And the people on Earth are pointing to only to the object to the right. So this object, which they claim was a comet, well, if you know anything about the size of comets, it wouldn't be the same size of the sun. That would make it almost equal. Remember, the moon and the sun are equal in size visually.
Yeah.
So this object roughly would have to be, this object was about 8 million miles away at the time that it passed, if it was roughly 7 times the diameter of Earth.
Yeah.
And it would give you a visual perspective of equal to the size of the moon and the sun.
Okay, now, having said that, you're saying that Planet 7X could have caused Hezekiah's sun to go back 10 steps. That Planet X could have came by and caused Joshua's longest day. You're saying that Planet X could have been the reason that we had 3 days of darkness during one of the plagues of Egypt during the Exodus, the time of Moses, before he could get the children of Israel out of Egypt. And you're saying that Planet 7X, also coming by again, but coming by on the other side, could have created a double eclipse, which could have caused the earth to go dark for 3 hours when Christ was on the cross. And you went back and checked that against statistical information or recorded data by ancient civilizations in China and other places, and they confirmed something was going on in the sky during the exact same times of those 4 major biblical events.
That's, the biblical accounts are following a scientific model to the T, mathematically as well. So we have a real object, and that's what the data continues to show us. That's somewhat scary here.
So it's not just a theory here. You're basing your theory of 7X on factual biblical accounts that, and scientifically, as an astronomer, you're saying, and it is doable, Paul, and here's how it's doable. If there is an object that keeps making its way around toward this earth, it always keeps, and each time it creates something. Like in Jonah's day, it created a sign in the heavens for 40 days. Jonah preached, hey, look at the sign. Nineveh, you're going to be destroyed in 40 days. Okay, so each time you're saying this Planet 7X could create those events.
We're in for some really phenomenal sites that are coming up. When this thing gets really close, when we start to go back through the tail again, you're going to see the aurora borealis go all the way down to the equator. And when that's super active, it hums like a trumpet when it's super active. You think there's trumpets going on.
Really?
And it's the aurora borealis going all the way down to the equator, because the tail is plasma. And what is the aurora? The aurora is when you have like a solar flare and plasma hits the Earth, it causes the aurora. Okay? Well, we're going to have a huge amount of plasma hitting the magnetic field of Earth. And you see it excited, and it's going to go, you're going to see extreme amount of colors and sounds.
I have actually heard those sounds of trumpets, Gil. Actually, I have heard it in the videos in the internet, but I also heard it in my home one day, and it was coming from the south. And it's that kind of sound that you can hear all around you. It's not coming from a specific place. It's coming from all around you. And the sound was like a screeching, kind of like a blowing of a horn type of, very low rumbling sound. And that is what you're referring to, right?
That's it.
It is possible that we can have new ranges set, not just in certain things, like they've already trying to establish a higher unit of a hurricane, and tornadoes, and even the way we do the earthquake setting, because this was during a time period where we never went through what we're about to go through here. Remember where the Bible says every mountain and island is moved?
Yes.
That's from one event. What type of earthquake does that? It says every wall on earth is cracked at that time. A fiery mountain hits earth so hard, earth is split, a third of the sea life dies, every wall on earth is cracked. The earth wobbles like a drunkard, like a hut in the wind. That is the description that follows a model of an impact of an asteroid the size of a mountain. And that is event number 2, 5 months later. That is done, Earth is hit on the nighttime side of Earth. In March, we're hit on the daylight side of Earth. So the safe side in March is the nighttime. Remember, Yeshua comes mid of night, because it's a Hebrew custom for a groom to pick up his bride. That's why Elijah announces, so, it follows the Hebrew custom. And
Amen.
the bride home, old home, is the old Jerusalem. Her new home will be the new Jerusalem. But in between that, the bride has to go to a mikvah to purify herself and to get her mind right for this type of marriage, to commit herself. That's why we're 3.5 years in the wilderness, preparing ourselves for a wedding. At the end of the 3.5 years, the bride in his lap.
In a 2008 Project Camelot interview, Government whistleblower Bob Dean announced that our worst fears would be realized during this coming flyby. That Earth would be on the wrong side of the sun as the Planet X system began its downward track back into the furthest reaches of our solar system. No doubt astronomer Carlos Ferrada saw this as well when he predicted that during this coming flyby, Nibiru will come within 14 million kilometers of the Earth. Consequently, the pole shift, as envisioned by Carlos Ferrada and predicted by Edgar Cayce, will happen for the very reason given by whistleblower Bob Dean. That Earth is just simply going to be at the wrong place and at the wrong time, and so it will be a real tribulation for humankind. First will come increased seismicity, which is already happening, followed by increased volcanism, which also is already happening. Then there will be the deep impact events that many of our modern astronomers and scientists are warning us about. And then will come the tidal forces of Nibiru and Nemesis as they gain a lithosphere lock on Earth. Then they'll pull the skin of our planet around. Novelist Ray Bradbury put it most eloquently when he said, "Something wicked this way comes."
It happened before. It will happen again. It's just a question of when.